Hello, welcome back. Today we're going to talk about simple interest and explain what it is and how we calculate it. So for our goals, then understand the basic concept of simple interest. Be able to use simple interest, the simple interest formula, which we'll discuss in a moment, to determine the interest, the principal and interest rate or time and investment, and also be able to use the simple interest formula to determine the future value. So let's talk about what the simple interest is. The simple interest is called simple because it's based only on the initial investment. A constant amount of interest is added every time period, and the formula for simple interest is given here. So what's in future videos, we'll talk about compound interest, which is actually grows exponentially, exists based on not only what you start with, but how much you've accumulated so far. Simple interest is only based, how much it grows only based on what you first put in. So not on how much you have. So if you had, amount in the bank, if you put $100 in the bank for 100 years and calculated generate interest, simple interest, it's only generating the interest on that first $100 you put in 100 years ago. Whereas compound interest would create interest not only on what you first put in, but also what you've accumulated over all that time. So that's one of the differences. And we'll talk about compound interest in a future video. But here's how much simple interest. Here's the formula. So the interest, I, in dollars, is equal to P, the principal. That's your initial investment, which you first put in dollars. R is your annual interest rate. And the formula is always given as a decimal, always put in as a decimal. Then T is always your time in years. So if your time is not given in years, you have to convert it to years. And your interest rate, if it's given as a percent, has to be converted to a decimal. Now, you can also find a future value by calculating it this way. So A is called a future value, or future amount after T years. And basically that's your principal, which you first put in, plus the interest, which is PRT. Okay, so the initial amount plus the interest for that many years. And then we can also kind of factor the P out and write it like this. Either way works. Now, a few other things to mention. Simple interest, as mentioned, is linear growth, has a constant rate of change, because the same constant amount is added every time period. And also, interestingly, for a bank, often consider 360 days as a year, not 365. So this is important to note in doing the calculations. Every time we have to think in terms of a year or the days of a year, we're going to put it in terms of 360 days, not 365. Now, let's take a look at some examples up on the right. So, number one, find the interest I if we have the following. So let's say our P, our principal, is $15. Our interest rate is 9% annually. And the T, let's just do 1 year first. So T is 1 year. Okay, so we want to find our interest given this. So our formula, once again, is this: I equals PRT. So here, if you notice, we have potential four variables in our formula. As long as you know 3 of them, we can always find the 4th. Okay, so this time we're told what each one is. Now, one thing we have to be careful of then is make sure we're in the right units. So P is 15, that's fine. Also, let's make sure it looks more like a $15. Now, the interest rate R, this needs to be written as R, and the formula is 0.09. So convert that to a decimal. And then T is in years, that's fine. And so here, then, this is going to be the interest, I, is going to be 15 times 0.09 times 1. Okay, this tells you if you want to make an investment of $15 at this interest rate, 9% for 1 year, this tells you how much interest you've accumulated after 1 year. That's not the total amount in the bank, but that's the interest you have so far. So if we do that, then, and just use a calculator, 15 times 0.09, then of course times 1, and that's going to be $1.35. Okay, so after 1 year, that's the amount of interest. And also, that's the amount of interest you generate every year. So once again, if you just start with $15, simple interest, left it in the bank for 100 years, you're only going to generate $1.35 of interest every year. That's all. Now, then your total amount in the bank then would be $15 be plus this, so $16.35. Let's do another example. Number 2. Okay, this time we want to find the principal, P. Okay, this time if we know this, so let's say also we have, let's say I, so the interest generated is $30. Our interest rate is 8%. And our time, our T, is 3/4. What does 3/4 mean? 3/4 of a year. Okay. Now, once again, R, we need to write that as a decimal. So R is going to be 0.08. Okay. And T, this needs to be put in terms of a year. Okay. So 3/4 of a year, that's going to be 3/4 out of 4. And so that's going to be 0.75 of a year. So 3/4 or 75% of a year. So once again, in this formula, your interest rate always has to be put in terms of a year. Okay. Now, once again, our I is equal to PRT. And you can either solve this formula for P or just plug everything in. That's up to you. I'll just plug everything in as it is. So I is 30. Then we have P, which we're trying to find. R is going to be 0.08. And then time is 0.75. Now, if we multiply those things together, if we multiply on the right side, 0.8 times 0.75, 0.08 rather, times 0.75, and that's going to be equal to 30 is equal to 0.06 times P, and then just divide 30 by 0.06. And that's going to be, your principal then is going to be $500. So in other words, think of this the way we thought of problem number 1, if I start with $500 at this interest rate for 3/4 of a year, then my interest I would generate would be $30 after that year. Okay, number 3, let's look at another one. Okay, this time I actually want to find the interest rate. So let's say we want to find R if, and what we know this time is our interest we generated is $20, starting with a principal of $700, and our T is equal to 13 weeks. Okay, so take a look once again at our formula. We know our time needs to be in terms of years. So this is how to get that. Well, how many weeks are in a year? 52. This going to be 13 out of 52. That fraction, that's going to be our year. And we can also just plug it in that way into our calculator, into our formula. It's better to do that if you can, because it makes it keeps allows your calculator to use all the significant figures. Okay. So once again, our formula is I equals PRT. And you can either solve this for R or plug it in the way it is. In fact, this time I think we'll solve this for R. This is a different way to show you how to do this. So if you want to solve a formula for R, basically I need to get rid of, so R is multiplied by P and by T. So remember the way to do multiplication is division. So if I divide both sides by capital P and T, and over here the P's will cancel out, the T's will cancel out. I'm left with R is equal to I over P times T. Okay. Now if I plug everything in here, interest was $20, our principal is 700, and then our T was 13 over 52. Okay, and you can But you have a graphing calculator and plug that in. Of course, you can also approximate the 13 over 52. Let's find out what this is going to be. Okay, and that I got was going to have to round this off a bit, and so that's going to be 0 point, and I'll just go to 4 decimal places at first. So 1 1, so 11428, so 1143. Okay, now this is not a percent, this is a decimal value. So just as we said, when you plug your interest rate into the formula, use it as decimal. So when you solve for it, the result is a decimal. Okay, and so then what that means, then that's going to be, if we change that to a percent, that's going to be 11.43%. So once again, what that says, if you started with $700, invested at 11.43% for 13 weeks, that's going to be about 1/4 of a year, then you would generate $20 of interest. And you would generate that same $20 of interest every year on those same conditions. I'm sorry, $20 per month. So that's not per year. That's per 13 weeks. So then that's 1/4 of a year. So it'd be $80 of interest per year. Okay. Now let's look at some more problems stated more in the form like an application, and we'll see how to solve these. Okay. This says a department store charges 18% annual rate for overdue accounts. How much interest will be owed on a $835 account that is 2 months overdue? So here, instead of kind of giving us the numbers right away, they're kind of telling us what everything is. We have to figure out what everything is first. We can do that. So let's take a look. So charges 18% annual interest rate. That's usually the easiest thing to pick out. Often is your rate. So R is going to be 18%. And this then is going to be, if we change it to a decimal, it's going to be 0.18. Okay. Now, our time is 2 months. And so that's going to be 2. So remember, there's 12 months in the year. So 2 out of 12, which is 1/6 of a year. Okay. That's going to be our year. Now, the question is, what is this? So what do we have left? We have 2 things left in our formula, P and I. Which one is which? Well, the question is how much interest. So I guess that's going to be the unknown thing. So what we know is since our principal, our P, the amount we're starting with, is 835. Since that's how much interest, what's left then should be your principal. So $835. And then I is the unknown. Okay. And so we're going to plug those in. And so I is going to be P, which is 835, times R, which is 0.18, times 2 months, or this basically is 1/6 of a year. I'm just going to plug those into our calculator. So we get, and also since it's going to be in dollars, let's round to the nearest cent. 835 times 0.18 times 1 divided by 6, and that's going to be $25.05. So that's the interest. In other words, if you had this account, you had $835 on this account, this interest rate, which is high, but often credit cards can be high, especially on overdue accounts for 2 months, and you have to pay another $25 on top of the $835 you already owe. Okay, take a look at the next one. Let's put a little more space here. Okay, this one says, if you pay a $120 loan, you pay $120 to a loan company for the use of $2,000 for 60 days, what annual interest rate did they charge? So once again, here we have to think again about what everything is. So let's list our variables. So we have our I, we have our P, our R, and our T. Figure out what each one is. Now, first off, in this case, probably the easiest thing to do is determine what our unknown is. It says, what annual interest rate did they charge? That's the question. So that's going to be what we're trying to find. So then we have to know the other three and see what each one is. Now, this one is a little different. Now, the next easiest thing to pick out is the days, 60 days. Okay. Now, we need to convert this to a year. And once again, this is where we said we use this kind of unusual thing for most of us, 360 days. Instead of 365, that's going to be 60. Oops, 60 divided by 360 of a year. And actually, that's going to be 1/6. Works out fairly nicely. Okay. Now, we need to figure out what here the principal is and what the interest is. So the idea of this is a loan company. So think about this maybe sort of like a, see those paycheck advance companies. So basically, if you show them your paycheck, they can advance you that amount. And then you have to pay some amount for them to do that, for them to be a business. What they make off doing that for you is then think of that as an interest charge. So what we can do is we can think of this as just as your principal, this $2,000. That's where you can get loaned. And to be able to use that, you're going to have to pay back. Of course, you also have to pay back the loan amount, but also what you're paying them to be able to get this loan is $120. Okay. So the interest then is 120. And then the principal is 2,000. So we just have to plug all this in. And once again, you can either solve this for I or plug it all in at once. This time I think I'll just plug it all in the formula. So I is 120 is equal to P, which is 2,000, times R, which is our unknown, times 1/6. Okay. Now let's kind of simplify these things over here. So 2,000 times 1/6, and that's not going to come out evenly. We'll have to kind of round it off a bit. Okay. That's going to be where we have 120, and this is going to be, I'm going to round, since we want to round everything at least correct, we'll round off, let's round off the 3 decimal places. It's going to be 333.333. If I use 3 decimal places, it's basically just 3 repeating, okay, times R, and then divide 120 by that. And so that comes out to be, turn this around, R is going to be approximately 0.36. Okay, remember that's a decimal value. That's not our percent rate. And so then our R's percent is going to be 36%, which would be a really large percent. Okay, that'd be a really big percent for that. Now, once again, that's an annual. Also need to make, this is an annual rate. Okay, so remember this is a 60-day loan. That's an annual rate. So also be clear on that. Let me go back up here. This other one, yeah, this is also an annual rate here than the one we did before. Okay, so if you do that, took that rate out for a loan, that'd be 36%, which would be a lot. Okay. Number 3. Once again, let's put a little more space. I'll probably need it here. This one actually has 2 questions on this one. It says George finds a company that charges 59 cents per day for every 1,000 borrowed. If he borrows 3,000 for 60 days, what amount will he repay, and what's the interest, and what interest rate will he pay to the company? Okay. Once again, let's kind of figure out what we have. First, we have to do a few things first. Okay. So we know the time, of course, T equals 60 days. And we have to convert that to year, out of 360 for a year. And that's exactly what we had just a moment ago. That's 1/6 of a year. Okay. What else do we know? Well, we have to work on a few things next. Okay. So he borrows $3,000. That's our principal. Okay. And that's how much he's going to borrow. Then interest rate, I, charges 59 cents per day for every $1,000 borrowed. So let's think about that. So the interest is going to pay. We can actually go ahead and calculate that. Okay. So what he's going to pay, that's going to be 59 cents per every 1,000 borrowed. Okay. So he borrows $3,000. So that's going to be 0.59 times 3 for the 3 times 1,000. Okay. Then times the 60 days. Let's find out what that is. Once again, what we did with the interest, it says he's going to charge us 59 cents per day for every $1,000 borrowed for 60 days. In this case, he took loan out for 60 days. So 59, $3,000. So 15.59 times 3 for $3,000 and times 60. We calculate that. And so that is $106.20. Okay. Now, also, we need to find our interest rate, but also we have two things we want to find. Okay, before we can also do that. Now, what amount will he repay? We can actually go ahead and calculate that. So the amount repaid is going to be the principal plus the interest. Okay, essentially that's kind of like this formula right here, except we already know what the interest is. Interest is P times R times T, but already calculate that another way. The goal here is also to find the R, the principal plus the interest. So the principal is the $3,000 plus the interest, which is the $106.20. And of course, that's going to be then $3,106.20. That's the amount he has to repay. Okay. Now, we also want to know, approximate what the approximate annual interest would be for doing this. Let me actually draw a bit of a line so we can separate these. The annual interest rate a little more space here. Okay. So if I use the same idea a minute ago, so I can also just plug those in, or also I can use a formula. If, like in a previous problem, this problem right here, I found the interest rate. I solved the formula for R. Okay. I just divided, since we have this formula to start with, I equals PRT. Okay. Then I divided to get the R by itself, I divided through by P and by T, get R equals I over PT. If I do that again, or you can do it either way, just plug them in. R equals I over E times T. So the interest is 106.2. The principal is $3,000 and then times 1/6 of a year. Okay. So we can plug all that in. So 106.2 divided by, and put parentheses to make sure you're dividing by the whole thing, 3,000 times 1 divided by 6. And so what I get then, once again, as a decimal, is 0.2124. And so this is going to be, then R is going to be 21.24% annually. So we took that loan out for a year, that's how much you would charge per year. Okay, one last problem. All right, this says, what is the purchase price of a 26-week T-bill with a maturity value of $1,000 that earns annual interest rate of 4.903%? Okay. Now this one is a bit different again, because what's happening here is that this T-bill, this idea of a T-bill, is that you're going to this time the T-bill essentially the entire thing. Okay. In other words, that's the total value, which your principal plus interest. Okay. So the T-bill value mature value is the principal plus the interest, which is actually equal to the A, this future amount. Okay, that's what we're trying to find here. All right. We know what the purchase price is. So once again, it's kind of use this formula, figure out what we have. So we have A. First off, let me back up. We'll say we'll use. All right, we'll trouble writing today, obviously. A equals P times 1 plus RT. Okay. Now, what do we know? We know that A, we just said that A is this $1,000. Okay. We need to know R. R is given is 4.9% annual interest rate, 4.903. Once again, we have to, of course, convert that to a decimal. And so that's going to be 0. And also, don't round this off. Leave it all there. 0.4903. So don't round that off. Leave it as it is. And then T is a 26-week. And so that's going to be, so 56 weeks or 52 weeks in a year. And actually, that's going to become to 1/2, which is nice. So 1/2 of a year. Okay. And then what's unknown then is what is the purchase price? So that's essentially going to be P, or P is what's unknown in this case. Okay. What's the purchase price? In other words, I'm going to put this, put a certain amount down, and then it's going to mature. When it matures, when it reaches $1,000, and so it's supposed to happen, a total of $1,000 after 26 weeks. What do I have to start? What do I have to start with? Okay. Now, if I can squeeze all this in. So what we have here is going to be A is equal to PRT. I'm going to plug these in, and I guess actually I'm going to have to go to the, or go to the next page, I guess, if I can. Let's see if I can squeeze this in here. Okay. So if I solve this for P, let's go back up here. I'm going to divide both sides by this. I'm going to have P is equal to A over 1 plus RT. So see what I did? I just divided both sides. This is just a number, 1 plus RT. Multiplied by P, so the way to undo multiplication is division. Divide it, and we get that. And so the P is going to be A, which is $1,000 over 1 plus R, which is 0.04903 times T, which is 1/2. Okay. So I'm going to put all that in my calculator and we'll see what we get. And since this is a dollar amount, round the nearest dollar. And so I'm going to start with 1,000 divided by 1 plus 0.04903 times 1/2. I'll just do 0.5. And what I get is $976.07. So basically, you didn't start off with, you start off with almost the entire thing anyway, but that's okay. So that shows you, so the basic essentially, if I want, of course, you're all doing half a year. That's a fairly short amount of time, but that's not a huge interest rate for something like that anyway. So it's not going to grow incredibly quickly. So basically, if I put in this much, that's my principal. I'm going to generate, so interest I'm going to generate is being 1,000 minus that. Okay, you can also find that if you want. And so then that's the interest I'm going to generate. Then when it matures to $1,000 after 26 weeks. That's the amount I have to put in right now. Okay, so let's review what we've learned is about simple interest. We learned that simple interest is, it's called simple because you're only adding the same constant amount every time. It's only based on what you initially put in, your principal. So I is your interest, P is your principal, and both of those are dollars. R is your annual interest rate, and it's in the formula is always as a decimal. If you solve for it, you get a decimal. Then time is always going to be in years, so it's not given in years, you have to convert it to years. You can also find the future value by simply adding the principal plus the interest together in this formula. And once again, since in using days, since banks actually use 300, many banks often use 360 days instead of 365 days for a year. So you have to do that when calculating your time is given in days. You have to then convert it to years. Thank you. Have a good day.